Well, let's bring in our panel of party commentators now on another very busy day with lots happening in the nation. Richard Mahoney is a Liberal commentator. Ashton Arsenault is a Conservative commentator. And Anne McGrath is an NDP commentator. Good to see you all.
Good to see you.
Good to see you all looking well.
Thank you.
It's been a whirlwind kind of a time in Canada these days. And we have the Prime Minister isolating now with his wife, waiting to find out if she's COVID-19 positive. Richard, I mean, to all of you, let's start there. What are you thinking as you watch this process, I guess, unfold, and I suppose the response to it?
So first on the thinking, I mean, it is all happening so fast. Like in the course of today, we found out the Prime Minister self-isolated. Cancellation of major sporting events.
School closing.
Our workplaces are making adjustments and getting people to work from home. So it's happening really fast. That's the first thing. As much as I worry about our collective health, I also think we need to pay some attention and worry about the decisions that people make. We're not all making good decisions all the time. People are hoarding masks and things like that. Those, panic is the enemy at a time like this. So you need some steady hands on the tiller to do this. I think fortunately Canada is actually, as serious as this is in relatively pretty good shape. And I say that not as a partisan, but first of all, we have, after SARS hit, we learned a lot of lessons as a country. We set up the Public Health Agency of Canada, for example. Our local public health officials have a much more robust, they know what they're doing now, more than they did 15 years ago. And so I think, as worrisome as it is, it looks to me like Canada as a whole, not just the federal government as a whole, is responding pretty robustly to this.
I think that's, Ashton, for Canadians, that's an important part of the conversation, right? Is do they feel they're getting the kind of leadership that gives them confidence? Because that's what you really need in a situation like this. People need to feel like they're in good hands.
Yeah, I mean, extremely fluid situation. I think, even as early as late last week, some of us, and I'll include myself into that pile, felt it was sort of being blown out of proportion, and maybe we were getting a little bit panicky when perhaps we shouldn't have been. But obviously, I've been proven false, and I think, frankly, as Canadians, we should be pretty proud up to this point how well our officials have responded to it, particularly as, there are still a lot of unknowns about what's going to come next, how the infection will spread across provinces, and then we'll also have to benchmark ourselves against our American counterparts. And frankly, there looks like there's some serious testing issues south of the border. I'm sure they will do their best to rectify that as soon as they can, but as of right now, I would applaud the Canadian government response.
Get into more of the Canada-U.S. relationship in a moment, but and what are your thoughts?
I don't disagree with what's been said. However, I will say that there are a couple of lessons that I think we need to take from this. One is that any cuts to healthcare are short-sighted, and they'll come back and bite you for sure. So I do worry about the stresses on the healthcare system as public funding has not been, keeping up. I think so. That's an issue. I agree with what's been said about public health, and that's why public health is so important. And when it gets pulled back, the consequences are dire. They're not dire on a daily basis, but they are in a situation like this. So I think that's an important thing to keep our eye on. And the other thing I worry about is the most vulnerable people. So people, for instance, living in remote communities in the north and in rural places in this country, and also those people who can't be sure that they will still be paid if they take time off because they're not feeling well. And I think that is a risk for them financially, it's a risk for them health-wise, and it's a risk for the rest of us.
I mean, part of the conversation from this government, Richard, has been that, we had the $1 billion package announced yesterday. And this sense that we are, when it comes to jumping in and helping, financially, that we're probably at the very early stages of this. Yep. Are we reassured by the messages coming from government that basically we've got everybody's back, and that $1 billion might have been the first installment of more to come? I mean, is that is that an important piece here?
I think it is an important piece, and I mean, obviously, I don't know what the federal government also announced its budget date this week. Which is March 30th.
We'll see if that holds, by the way.
Right.
There's lots of talk about the future of Parliament sitting in these days, and legislatures across the country are thinking about shutting down, at least temporarily. So.
And we had an election canceled today.
Yeah, an election canceled.
But it seems to be that budget whatever, I think the original plan, that budget was going to, as my understanding, was going to focus in large measure on climate change and climate change measures. Feels to me like that probably can't happen now. I mean, they could do all the climate change measures they want. What the back to your question, the country's going to want a focus, and it's going to put a focus on their on response to Corona, whatever the measures in the budget are. I'm speculating now, but if I was them, I would maybe delay some of those measures until we get through this, and then have a second financial statement, an update or something. We'll see. But I mean, my point is, I think people are going to look not only this week for the handling of it, but the government and the whole government approach, and all that's good, but they're going to look at that budget to be the next step.
Ashton, beyond and beyond the beyond the response we've seen so far, and beyond the narrower focus, if I can put it that way, on health and safety issues, there's the economy. The markets are crashing through the floor. Look at what's happening to various sectors of the economy. Large gatherings are being canceled left and right. The sports leagues in suspension. That will have a significant effect on the economy as well. So what do you think we're headed for in terms of, to Richard's point on the budget, does it have to be a massive stimulus budget to respond to what we're seeing?
Well, it's right now, as of today, the worst conditions since 2008. And what we have is a confluence of events, first and foremost being COVID-19, secondly, an oil price war, and third, just shaky investor confidence at writ large. And that is coming together to create sort of this tsunami of uncertainty that is going to have to be addressed by governments. I think that there will be a significant stimulus package.
But the narrative from Conservatives so far has been, you spent the cupboard bare, you're not ready for the tough times. Does that narrative fade at some point? And that was then, and this is now, and it doesn't matter how deeply in deficit the government is, it may have to go deeper into deficit.
To be clear, I think there's some wiser decision making could have been made with respect to public finances over the last couple of years, but we'll have to put that aside, obviously for the greater good. When we're talking about an economy that's deeply sliding into recession, people losing their jobs, we're going to have any number of people that have a pretty serious illness that we'll have to take care of. At a certain point in the day, you're just going to have to put politics on the table and let it lie for a while.
Yeah.
There's going to have to be economic stimulus measures. I mean, the people are losing their, like as I said before, there are people who have jobs that can't afford to take time off because they can't lose the pay. We're going to have people losing their jobs. So there has to be economic stimulus at a fairly significant level, I believe. And I think it is comparable to 2008, 2009. There was a need for stimulus spending, and stimulus spending makes sense in a circumstance like this. Interest rates are low. It will create jobs. It will produce results in the healthcare system. I mean, there's all sorts of arguments for why this is important now. But I think in all of it, we have to keep our eye on jobs. I think that people need to have jobs. They need to be protected in those jobs, and they need to know that if they have to take time off because they're not feeling well, they can do it.
Yeah, and a lot of this is post whenever this event passes, right? Because I'm thinking it's hard to generate confidence with stimulus at a time when people are in a state of panic. Like it's just because the government says we're going to lower, or the Bank of Canada cuts interest rates, doesn't have everybody go, now's the time to go. I mean, there are bigger things on people's minds than thinking this is a good opportunity to get into the market or something for a lot of people. Right?
Yeah, panic is not a really good for decision making. I mean, we have to have evidence-based decision making, and we've seen examples of people making decisions that aren't based in evidence.
Right.
I would argue things like canceling flights from Europe. Personally, I think when the virus is already here, the issue is slowing it down.
You started it. Let's stay there. How should Canada? There are lots of talk today that with Donald Trump's decision to cancel flights from Europe for the next 30 days, to ban them, that there will be implications for Canada. That we have to have tougher screening to satisfy the Americans. Otherwise, the big concern is that travelers from Europe trying to get to the United States will come to Canada and then travel from Canada to the U.S. And if the Americans won't like that, that sort of circumvents the ban. So what should our response be?
I don't think that we should be closing down borders. I think that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Like I said, it's not like you can close yourself off and not have it. The virus is in Canada. And so what we need to do is figure out how to slow it down, how to deal with it, slow it down. And I think in terms of any international work, you have to do it in collaboration with your international partners.
But can we satisfy Donald Trump that, look, we are not going to ban flights from Europe to match your ban of flights from Europe, and that he would be okay with that?
Yeah, I think so. I don't think the president should expect that we would follow suit with respect to banning flights from European countries. I do think we can do a couple of quick things to satisfy those who feel as though the ball might be getting dropped somewhere. For example, enhanced screening at airports, perhaps, when passengers are getting off the plane, investing in research, so perhaps there's quicker diagnostic tools to screen these quicker. But in terms of banning flights from European countries, I think that's a bit ridiculous, and I don't think you'll find too much disagreement
Richard?
here.
I agree with that, but what a great example of our previous points about panic. I mean, not to be partisan about this, but President Trump.
That's twice you've said that.
I know.
It's usually a precursor to saying partisan.
I don't want to be partisan, but listen, Trump has clearly made this thing worse for us. We probably have more cases in Canada as a result of their tardy response. His reassuring people that it was solved a month ago. The market, people who are expert on this far more than I am, are saying his handling of this is making the market reaction to it worse, so that's going to have an economic impact on us. And here's yet another example where he, without consulting any governments, including Canada's, he makes a change to their travel policy, which, as you point out, is going to have an impact. People are going to route themselves through Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, Ottawa, wherever. So, even when you make the right decisions, other governments and your neighbor makes some wrong decisions, and you're hit. So all those things, we're going to have to probably do all those things and then some. The one thing I would say is, as always, we should take the lead from public health officials who know this stuff, who've experienced it, who are experts in it. As Anne said, evidence-based decision-making, rather than panic, will always be the friend. The two things that I understand that they are focused on are the ones we want them focused on, which is to slow down the spread and to contain the actual number of cases.
Flatten the curve.
Right. Because a rapid spread, even with a less number of cases, or a relatively small number of cases, is going to
overwhelm the system. Okay. Let's leave it on that note. I suspect we'll be talking about this again, but thanks for your time tonight.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.